The void of space was not silent and it was not empty. It was full of echoes that traveled faster than light. The distress signal sent by Captain Ventress 6 months ago had moved through the warp like blood spreading in water. It was a scream for help that carried the golden signature of the Emperor himself. That signal touched many things in the dark. It touched the listening posts of the Imperium on distant moons. It touched the automated sensors of dead worlds. And it touched the minds of things that hated humanity. The signal was a beacon. It promised war, and it promised a prize. On the surface of Pandora, the victory against the Tyranids felt like a distant memory. The jungle was hot and wet and full of new dangers. The dead zones were growing back, but the plants were twisted. They had tasted the alien poisons of the Tyranids, and they had changed. The leaves were sharper. The vines moved faster. Even the air smelled different. It smelled like ozone and old copper. Captain Ventress stood on the reinforced wall of the outpost. He looked tired. Space Marines were built to fight for weeks without rest, but Ventress had been fighting for months without support. His armor was a wreck. The beautiful blue ceramite was cracked and scorched. He had patches of raw metal showing where the paint had been burned away by acid. His ammunition counters were all in the red. The heavy bolters on the wall had 5 belts of ammo left. The last cannons were running on backup power cells that could fail at any moment. The human soldiers were in worse shape. Their uniforms were rotting in the humidity. Their boots were falling apart. They were thin because the rations were almost gone. They were eating local fruit that the Na'vi said was safe, but it gave the men cramps and fevers. They were holding the line with tape and prayers. Ventress watched a squad of Na'vi warriors training in the clearing below. They moved with a grace that no human could match. But they were not hunting animals anymore. They were practicing fire and maneuver drills. They were learning how to overlap fields of fire. They were learning how to kill things that wore armor. It was a necessary sin. Ventress had taught them these things to save them, but he knew it had cost them their innocence. The sensors in the command bunker began to howl. It was not the rhythmic ping of a local contact. It was the screaming alarm of a high-energy transition. Ventress ran to the console. The screen showed gravity waves distorting the space at the edge of the system. This was not a biological fleet. These were engines. Massive plasma drives tearing a hole in reality. The ships emerged from the warp with the violence of a hammer hitting glass. They were not the reinforcements that Ventress had hoped for. They were not the blue and gold of Ultramar. These ships were black. They were flying fortresses covered in Gothic arches and gargoyles. They blocked out the stars. The lead ship was a battle barge of colossal size. Its hull was marked with the white cross of the Black Templars. Flanking it were the grey cruisers of the Inquisition. Ventress felt a cold weight in his chest. The Black Templars were not diplomats. They were crusaders. They hated aliens with a fury that burned brighter than stars. They did not make alliances. They did not show mercy. They purged. The Voxcaster crackled to life. The voice that came through was not human. It was synthesized and cold. It did not ask for identification. It stated a fact. This is Inquisitor Valeria of the Ordo Xenos. We have received your signal. We have detected the taint of Xenos collaboration. Prepare for immediate boarding and assessment. Resistance is heresy. Ventress looked at Grace Augustine. She was shaking. She knew what those symbols meant. She knew that the Imperium had come to save them, but it might decide to burn them instead. In the forest, the Na'vi looked up. They saw the metal mountains in the sky. They felt the cold intent pressing down on them. Dawa fell silent. The planetary network sensed a threat that did not want to eat biomass. It wanted to kill the soul of the world. And far behind the Imperial fleet in the deep currents of the warp, something else was moving. A red shadow was following the ships. It had smelled the Emperor's light on Pandora, and it was hungry for a different kind of war. The rescue had arrived, and it brought doom with it. The sky above the Imperial outpost turned black with smoke. The clouds were not natural storm clouds. They were the exhaust trails of hundreds of drop pods and heavy transport shuttles screaming down from orbit. The noise was deafening. It sounded like the sky was tearing apart. The birds of Pandora stopped singing. The insects stopped buzzing. The only sound was the roar of engines and the boom of metal hitting the earth. These were not the controlled landings of the Ultramarines. These were impacts. The drop pods smashed into the forest around the outpost. They crushed trees that were hundreds of years old. They buried themselves in the mud and hissed with steam. The message was clear before a single soldier stepped out. The new arrivals did not care about the forest. They did not care about the agreement. They were here to conquer. Captain Ventress stood on the landing pad and watched the deployment. He stood at attention. His armor was still damaged from the Tyranid War. He held his helmet under his arm. His face was grim. Beside him stood Grace Augustine. She looked small next to the Space Marine. Her human face was pale. She was wringing her hands together. Jake Sully and Thierry stood 10 meters back. They were armed, but their weapons were lowered. They looked at the falling ships with the eyes of hunters who realize they are now the prey. The first transport shuttle landed on the pad. It was a massive black brick of a ship. It was covered in gold skulls and chains. The ramp lowered with a grinding sound that hurt the ears. Steam poured out of the cargo bay. Heavy footsteps shook the metal of the ramp. 10 warriors walked down the ramp. They were Space Marines, but they looked different from Ventress. Their armor was painted black with white shoulder pads. On the white pads were black crosses. They wore tabards of cloth over their armor like medieval knights. The cloth was stained with oil and dirt. They did not look like shiny heroes. They looked like executioners. They carried bolters that were chained to their wrists. This showed that they would never drop their weapons until the enemy was dead. The leader of the group walked in the center. He was huge. He wore a helmet shaped like a skull. A red crest made of stiff horsehair ran down the top of his helmet. He carried a power sword in one hand and a storm shield in the other. This was Castellan Draco of the Black Templars. He was a man who had burned 12 worlds in the name of the Emperor. He stopped 5 meters from Ventress. He did not salute. He did not offer his hand. He just stared through the red lenses of his skull helmet. Behind the Black Templars came a different kind of horror. A woman walked down the ramp. She wore power armor that was slim and fitted to her body. Over the armor, she wore a heavy coat made of leather and velvet. The coat was embroidered with symbols of eyes and scales. She carried a staff topped with a golden eagle. Her face was sharp and cold. Half of her head was shaved. Cables ran from her skull into the collar of her armor. Floating behind her was a skull. The skull had mechanical eyes and a small anti-gravity engine. It buzzed like an angry wasp. This was Inquisitor Valeria of the Ordo Xenos. She was a hunter of aliens. She looked at Ventress, and then she looked at the Na'vi standing behind him. Her lip curled in disgust. Ventress spoke first. "Welcome to Pandora, my Lord Castellan. Welcome, Inquisitor. We are relieved to see reinforcements. The Tyranid threat has been pushed back, but our resources are critical." Castellan Draco did not remove his helmet. His voice came out through a speaker. It sounded like grinding rocks. "You speak of relief, Captain. I see only shame. I look at this outpost and I do not see an Imperial fortress. I see a zoo. I see human soldiers standing next to Xenos filth. I see the weapons of the Emperor in the hands of savages. Explain this before I decide that you are a traitor to your blood. Ventress did not flinch. He had faced monsters and demons. He would not be intimidated by a brother Astartes. I acted according to the tactical reality of this theatre. The Tyranid force was overwhelming. The indigenous population possesses a biological connection to the planet. I utilized them as a local militia force. It was the only way to hold the line until you arrived. It was a strategic necessity. Draco took a step forwards. Necessity is the excuse of the weak. The Codex Astartes teaches us to purge the alien. It does not teach us to arm them. You have armed them. You have trained them. You have let them walk on hallowed ground. This smells of heresy. Inquisitor Valeria stepped forward. Her voice was smooth and dangerous. She tapped her staff on the metal deck. Peace, Castellan. Let us hear the captain out. We are here to assess, not to execute. At least not yet. She walked past Ventress and approached Grace. She looked Grace up and down. You are Dr. Augustine. Huh? The reports say you are the expert on this world. Grace nodded. I am. I've studied Pandora for 30 years. I know more about this biosphere than anyone. Valeria smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Good. Then you will explain the abominations. We detected the signal signatures of your avatars. We know you have been mixing human DNA with Xenos biology. You have been creating hybrids. You have been transferring human souls into alien flesh. Grace swallowed hard. It's not magic. It's science. The avatars are tools. They allow us to interact with the environment safely. They allow us to communicate with the Na'vi. Valeria laughed softly. It was a dry sound. Science without faith is just heresy with a different name. To pollute the holy form of humanity is a crime. To mix our blood with the blood of beasts is a sin against the throne. You have not just broken the law, Doctor. You have broken the most sacred rule of our species. Thou shalt not suffer the alien to live. And yet you have tried to become one. Jake Sully stepped forward. He held his rifle across his chest. His tail lashed back and forth in agitation. He spoke in English. Back off. She saved this base. We all did. If it weren't for the Alliance, the bugs would have eaten everyone. You show up late and start throwing insults. That's not how it works. Castellan Draco turned his head slowly to look at Jake. He saw the blue skin. He saw the cat-like eyes. He saw the human weapon in alien hands. The Castellan raised his storm shield. Silence, beast. You do not speak to a servant of the Emperor. You do not speak at all. Ventress stepped between them. He held up a hand. Stand down, both of you. This is not the time for conflict. We have a fleet in orbit. We have a Hive Fleet remnant in the system. We need to be united. Castellan, Inquisitor, please. Come to the command center. Review the logs. See the data. If you still find fault with my command after you know the truth, then I will submit to your judgment. But do not start a war in my base while the enemy is still out there. Draco stared at Ventress for a long moment. Then he lowered his shield. Very well, Captain. We will review your logs. But know this. If I find that you have turned from the light, I will not hesitate. I will cut you down myself. They moved into the outpost. The atmosphere changed instantly. The Black Templars did not walk like guests. They walked like owners. They pushed RDA technicians out of the way. They kicked crates of supplies over if they were in the path. They marched in a phalanx that filled the corridors. The Na'vi warriors who were inside the base flattened themselves against the walls. They hissed quietly, but they did not attack. They could smell the violence on the newcomers. They knew that these black armored giants were different. They smelled like old blood and fire. In the command center, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Ventress brought up the holographic map of Pandora. He showed the locations of the battles. He showed the dead zones where the orbital strikes had burned the forest. He showed the tracking data of the Tyranid swarms. Valeria watched the data with hungry eyes. Her servo skull hovered over the console, scanning every file. She was not looking at the battles. She was looking at the biological data. She was looking at the information about Awa. This network, Valeria said, pointing to the glowing lines of the root system. You claim it is a sentient consciousness. You claim the planet thinks. Grace nodded. She stayed on the other side of the table from the Black Templar. Yes, it's a neural network. Billions of connections. It regulates the ecosystem. It stores memories. It can even coordinate the immune response of the planet. That's how we beat the Tyranids. We woke it up. We gave it a target. Valeria's eyes narrowed. You communed with a Xenos intelligence. You made a pact with a planetary mind. This is not biology, Doctor. This is warcraft. This is sorcery. A planet that thinks is a planet that can be corrupted. How do you know this Owa is not a diamond in disguise? How do you know it is not a trap set by the ruinous powers? Grace shook her head. It's not like that. It's biological. It's just nature. It's pure. Draco slammed his fist onto the metal table. The sound rang like a gunshot. Nothing Xenos is pure. That is the lie that leads to damnation. You look at a monster and see nature. I look at it and see a threat. This network is a weapon. If it can control the animals, it can control us. If it can coordinate a defense, it can coordinate an attack. It must be destroyed. We must burn the roots. We must poison the water. We must kill the brain of this world before it decides to kill us. Ventress spoke quietly. It already decided to kill us once. And then we made peace. The Emperor commanded me to show mercy, Castellan. I received a vision. I felt his presence. He told me to find another way. He told me that extermination was not the only path. Draco turned to Ventress. His voice was low and dangerous. You hear voices, brother? You think the Emperor speaks to you? The Emperor sits on the golden throne. He has been silent for 10,000 years. He does not speak to captains on backwater worlds. He speaks through the High Lords. He speaks through the ecclesiarchy. He speaks through the codex. If you are hearing voices, then you are compromised. You are listening to the whispers of the warp. This was the accusation Ventress feared most. To be called a heretic was a death sentence. To be called insane was almost as bad. I know what I felt, he said firmly, and the result proves it. We won. The planet is secure. The resource extraction can resume once the ecosystem stabilizes. We have added a world to the Imperium without spending 1 billion lives to take it. Is that not victory? Valeria interrupted. Victory is not just about survival, Captain. It is about purity. A victory won with unclean weapons is a defeat for the soul. However, she paused and looked at the map again. The Inquisitor was pragmatic in her own cruel way. The Tyranids are the immediate threat. If this network is effective against them, it has value. For now, we will study it. My adepts will dissect it. We will learn how it works. And if we can weaponize it for the glory of mankind, we will take it. If we cannot, then we will burn it. But the terms of your alliance must change. What terms? Ventress asked. Valeria smiled her cold smile. The Xenos do not get to be partners. They do not get to be allies. They are subjects. They are property. They will submit to imperial law. They will surrender their weapons. They will provide tithes of labor and resources. They will be registered and tagged. Any who refuse will be liquidated. And the avatars, she looked at Jake and Grace. The avatars are finished. The program is terminated. All hybrid bodies will be destroyed. All humans currently inhabiting them will return to their true bodies or be executed for tech heresy. This is non-negotiable. Jake started to shout, "You can't just come here," and the Templar moved faster than a human eye could follow. He backhanded Jake across the face. The blow knocked the Avatar backward. Jake hit the wall and slid down. His nose was broken. Blue blood ran down his face. Neytiri screamed and reached for her knife. A dozen bolters clicked as the Black Templars aimed at her. "Hold!" Ventress roared. He stepped in front of Neytiri. He put his armored body between her and the bolters. "If you fire, you start a war right here. A war we will lose. Look outside." He pointed to the window. Outside the command center, the news of the violence had spread. Hundreds of Na'vi warriors were emerging from the forest. They were riding dire horses and Ikran. They were armed with their bows and the autoguns Ventress had given them. They surrounded the outpost. They did not look afraid. They looked angry. The Black Templars had one ship on the ground. The rest were in orbit. If the Na'vi attacked now, they would overrun the landing zone before the fleet could bombard them. It would be a massacre. Draco looked out the window. He saw the army of aliens. He did not look worried. He looked eager. "Let them come," he growled. "We have ammunition. We have faith. We will pile their bodies as high as the walls." Ventress grabbed Draco's shoulder armor. "And while you are killing them, the Tyranids will return. The Hive Fleet is regrouping at the edge of the system. If we spend our ammo killing our allies, we will have nothing left for the real enemy. Think, Castellan. Use your tactical mind. We need them as meat shields, if nothing else." This argument seemed to reach the Black Templar. He hated aliens, but he understood war. He understood the value of fodder. He pulled away from Ventress's grip. "Fine," he spat. "We will not purge them today. But they are not allies. They are conscripts. They will obey or they will die. And you, Captain, you are on probation. Your command is suspended. I am assuming control of the defense of this system. You will report to the chaplain for spiritual evaluation. If he finds a single speck of corruption in your soul, I will give you the Emperor's peace myself." Draco turned and marched out of the room. His squad followed him. The air seemed to get lighter when they left, but the damage was done. Jake pulled himself up from the floor. He wiped the blood from his face. His eyes were hard. "They aren't going to stop, are they?" he asked. Ventress shook his head. "No, they are Black Templars. They do not know how to stop. They only know how to crusade." Grace was trembling. "They want to kill the Avatars. They want to kill us." Ventress looked at her. "I will try to buy you time. But Inquisitor Valeria is dangerous. She uses logic, not emotion. You have to prove to her that the Avatars are more useful alive than dead. You have to give her data that she cannot get any other way." Neytiri spoke for the first time. Her voice was cold. "These new sky people, they are death. I feel it. They are empty inside. No spirit, only hate. We should have killed them when they landed." Ventress looked at her with sadness. "If you had attacked, they would have turned this continent to glass. You cannot fight them with bows. You cannot fight them with anger. You have to survive them. And that is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done." The next few days were a slow nightmare. The Black Templars took over the outpost. They set up shrines to the Emperor in the mess hall. They broadcast hymns over the loudspeakers 24 hours a day. They forced the human crew to attend prayer services. They punished anyone who was late with lashings. The mood in the base went from tired hope to terrified obedience. The Na'vi were banned from the inner perimeter. They were forced to stay in a camp outside the walls. The Templars called it the Zenus Pen. Ventress watched it all and could do nothing. He was under house arrest in all but name. He was allowed to move around the base, but he was always watched by a Templar. He saw the way the new soldiers looked at his Ultramarines. They looked at them with suspicion. They whispered that the Ultramarines had gone native, that they were soft, that they had forgotten their duty. Tension built between the two chapters. A fight broke out in the motor pool when a Templar insulted an Ultramarine's honor. It ended with broken bones and both men in the brig. In the forest, the situation was worse. The Na'vi clans were gathering. They had heard about the arrival of the Black Fleet. They had heard about Jake being struck. The younger warriors wanted to attack. They said the treaty was broken. Su Te, who had survived the Tyranid War with terrible scars, led the war faction. He argued that they should strike now before the new humans established a foothold. He said that waiting was suicide. Jake and Neytiri tried to hold them back. They argued for patience, but their words were weak because they knew Tute was right. The new humans were not going to coexist. They were going to consume. The breaking point came a week after the landing. A Black Templar patrol was moving through the forest. They were mapping the area for a new defensive line. They came across a sacred grove. It was a place where the Na'vi buried their dead. The trees were covered in spirit catchers and woven items. To the Na'vi, it was holy ground. To the Black Templars, it was a site of Xenos idolatry. The sergeant in charge ordered the grove burned. He said it was an affront to the Emperor. Flamers roared. The dry wood caught fire instantly. The spirit catchers burned. The bones of ancestors turned to ash. A group of Na'vi hunters saw the smoke. They rushed to the grove. When they saw the Sky People burning their ancestors, they did not think about treaties. They did not think about strategy. They knocked their arrows and fired. 2 Templars took arrows in the joints of their armor. They did not die, but they were hurt. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. The Templars opened fire with bolters. The explosive rounds tore through the trees and the hunters. 5 Na'vi died in seconds. The rest fled into the canopy. The Templars did not pursue. They just finished burning the grove and marched back to base. When news of the incident reached the outpost, Castellan Draco did not apologize. He demanded the surrender of the hunters who had fired on his men. He demanded that the clan leader come to the base and offer his life as penance. If these demands were not met in 24 hours, he promised to launch a punitive crusade against the nearest clan settlement. Ventress found Draco in the command bunker. The Castellan was sharpening his sword. "You cannot do this," Ventress said. "You burned their dead. You provoked them." Draco did not look up. They attacked Astartes. That is the only fact that matters. They drew blood from the Emperor's chosen. For that, they must bleed in return. It is the law. "It is a trap," Ventress argued. "The Tyranids are still out there. If we march into the forest to fight the Na'vi, we leave the base exposed. The hive mind will see the weakness. It will attack while we are divided. You are doing exactly what the enemy wants." Draco stopped sharpening his sword. He stood up. He towered over Ventress. "You care too much for these beasts, Captain. You think like a politician, not a warrior. But perhaps you are right about the Tyranids. They are the greater threat." Draco paused. He seemed to be thinking. Then he made a decision that was worse than war. "We will not march out. We will make them come to us. We will take a hostage. We will take something they value. Then they will submit." "What are you planning?" Ventress asked, dread pooling in his stomach. Draco pointed to the screen. It showed the location of the Tree of Souls. "The Inquisitor tells me that this is the center of their network, the heart of their false god. We will seize it. We will set charges around it. And we will tell the savages that if they do not surrender every weapon and every leader, we will blow their god into splinters." Ventress stared at him. "That will not make them submit. That will make them crazy. They will throw themselves at the walls until everyone is dead. You are starting a war of extermination." Draco nodded calmly. "Then let it be extermination. If they love their false god more than their lives, They do not deserve to live. Prepare your men, Captain. We move at dawn. Ventress left the bunker. He walked out into the rain. He looked up at the grey sky. He realized that the Alliance was dead. The hope of coexistence was dead. The Black Templars had killed it with their dogma. He had a choice to make. He could obey his superior officer and help commit genocide, or he could disobey and become a traitor. He touched the symbol of the Ultramarines on his chest. Courage and honor. That was the motto. But what was honorable about slaughtering natives? And what was courageous about following orders you knew were wrong? He went to the brig, where Jake and Grace were being held. They had been locked up after the meeting for their own safety. He dismissed the guard. He opened the cell door. Jake looked up. He looked tired and beaten. "What's happening?" Jake asked. Ventress looked at him. "They are going to the Tree of Souls. They are going to hold it hostage." Jake stood up. His face went pale. "That will kill the planet. If they damage the connection there, it will send a shockwave through the network. It could kill Ewa." "I know," Ventress said. "I cannot stop them. They have the numbers. They have the authority. But I can give you a chance." Jake looked at him suspiciously. "What kind of chance?" Ventress handed him a data slate. "This is the patrol route for the eastern perimeter. There is a blind spot in the sensors between 0300 and 0400. The guard rotation is slow there. If you leave now, you can slip out. You can warn the clans. You can move the people away from the tree." Grace looked at the Space Marine. "You're letting us go. That's treason. You'll be executed." Ventress put his helmet on. His voice came through the speaker, distorted and mechanical. "I am an Ultramarine. We do not fear death. We fear disgrace. What is happening here is a disgrace. Go, before I change my mind." Jake nodded. He didn't say thank you. There was no time. He grabbed Grace and they ran. They disappeared into the dark corridors of the base. Ventress watched them go. He knew he had just signed his own death warrant. But as he walked back to his barracks, he felt lighter. He had chosen his path. He would face the judgment of the Inquisition soon enough. But first, he had to prepare for the storm. Because when the Na'vi found out what the Templars were planning, Pandora was going to burn. The next morning, the column of tanks rolled out of the gates. Land raiders and rhinos painted black. Predator tanks with less cannons. Hundreds of Space Marines marching in lockstep. Castellan Draco led the way in his personal Land Raider. He stood in the open hatch, his cape blowing in the wind. He looked like a king of war. Ventress and his Ultramarines brought up the rear. They were silent. They were unhappy. But they marched. They were Astartes. They followed orders. The forest was eerily quiet. There were no animals, no birds. It was as if the planet was holding its breath. They reached the Tree of Souls without firing a shot. The great willow trees glowed with bioluminescence, even in the daylight. The long tendrils of light hung down like the hair of a goddess. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. And then the engines of war crushed the undergrowth. The tanks smashed the sacred glowing plants. The boots of the Black Templars trampled the moss. Draco ordered his tech marines to set the charges. They drilled into the roots of the great tree. They placed melter bombs and plasma charges, enough explosives to crack a continent. When they were done, Draco picked up a voxcaster. He set it to the maximum frequency. He spoke to the forest. He spoke to the hidden eyes he knew were watching. "Inhabitants of Pandora, I hold the life of your god in my hand. You have 1 hour. Bring me your leaders. Bring me your weapons. Kneel before the servants of the Emperor, or watch your world die." The answer did not come in words. It came in a sound, a low vibration that started in the ground and rose up through the boots of the Marines. It was a rumble, a growl. It was the sound of a planet waking up and deciding that it had had enough. On the ridge overlooking the valley, thousands of Na'vi appeared. They did not shout, they did not scream, they just stood there. And with them were the animals, viper wolves, thanators, hammerheads, even the massive Leonopteryx in the sky. All of them standing together, all of them looking at the black armor in the valley. Inquisitor Valeria watched from her rhino. She looked at her scanner. The energy readings were spiking. The network was surging. Fascinating, she whispered. It is mobilizing. It is reacting like an immune system attacking a virus. She looked at the Black Templars. She looked at the explosives. And for the first time since she arrived, she looked afraid. We may have miscalculated, she said to her scribe. We treated them like savages, but we are standing inside a living organism, and we just threatened its heart. The first arrow flew. It hit a Black Templar in the throat. He gurgled and fell. Then the sky turned dark as 10,000 arrows blocked out the sun. The crusade had begun, and this time there would be no mercy. The roar of the Black Templar bolters was a continuous thunder that drowned out the screams of the dying. The Valley of the Tree of Souls had become a slaughterhouse. The engagement ranges were point blank. There was no room for strategy and no room for mercy. The Na'vi had charged with the desperation of a species facing extinction, and the Black Templars had met them with the cold fury of fanatics. It was biology against machinery. It was flesh against Ramite. The first wave of viper wolves broke against the line of shields like water against a cliff. They were smashed by power mauls and cut apart by chainswords. But behind them came the warriors, thousands of them. They leapt over the bodies of the dead animals. They fired arrows into the eye lenses of helmets. They jammed obsidian knives into the soft seal joints of armor. Castellan Draco stood in the center of the formation. He was a statue of death. His storm shield was battered and scratched, but it held. A Thanator, the massive apex predator of the rainforest, lunged at him. It was a beast of muscle and armored skin that could crush a tank. Draco did not step back. He met the charge. He slammed the edge of his shield into the beast's nose. The impact cracked bone. As the monster reeled back, Draco drove his power sword up through its jaw and into its brain. The energy field on the blade boiled the creature's blood instantly. He kicked the carcass off his blade and swung around to decapitate a Na'vi rider who tried to flank him. He was chanting the litany of hate as he fought. His voice was amplified by his helmet speakers. It boomed over the battlefield. Suffer not the alien to live. Cleanse the stars. Purge the unclean. On the left flank, Captain Ventress and his Ultramarines were fighting a different kind of war. They were not enjoying the slaughter. They were fighting with discipline deficiency. They fired in controlled bursts. They covered each other's reloads. They moved back step by step to keep the distance open. Ventress saw a face he recognized in the charging crowd. It was a young warrior named Kate, whom he had taught to field strip an autogun 2 weeks ago. Now Kate was screaming in hate and raising a spear. Ventress fired once. The bolt round took the boy in the chest. There was no time for regret. There was only the mission. But Ventress felt a sickness in his gut that had nothing to do with the toxins in the air. This was a waste. It was a waste of ammunition, a waste of life, and a strategic disaster. The sheer weight of the Na'vi attack was beginning to tell. A Black Templar initiate was pulled down by 3 warriors. They ripped his helmet off and stabbed him in the neck. Another Marine was crushed when a hammerhead Titanother rammed his position. The beast died a second later as 3 melter guns turned it into steam. But the Marine was gone. The Black Templars were killing 10 for every one they lost, but there were too many enemies. The forest itself was attacking. Vines whipped out to snare legs. The ground seemed to shift under their feet. The bioluminescent plants flashed with strobing lights that confused the auto-senses of the helmets. Inquisitor Valeria sat inside her Rhino command vehicle, watching the tactical display. The rune for the planetary network was glowing white-hot. The energy output from the Tree of Souls was off the charts. It was not just coordinating the animals. It was pulling energy from the planet's core. It was building up a charge. "It is a weapon," she whispered. "Draco was right. It is not just a temple. It is a psychic cannon. If that energy discharges, it could wipe out the crusade force." She keyed her vox. "Castellan, the Zenith focus is critical. You cannot hold this position. The network is surging. You must terminate the target." Draco heard the order. He looked around. His crusade was bogging down. He was surrounded by a sea of blue skin and teeth. He could fight for days, but his men were running low on bolt shells. He saw the great tree glowing behind him. The lights on its tendrils were pulsing in time with the heartbeat of the assault. It was the source of their courage. It was the idol that drove them. Destroy the idol, and the savages will break. That was the logic of the crusade. That was the logic of the Imperium. "Tech Marine," Draco roared. "Prime the charges. Burn it all." The Tech Marine at the base of the tree obeyed. He typed the command sequence into his data slate. The melter charges drilled into the massive roots of the Tree of Souls hummed with power. The fusion reactions primed. The magnetic containment fields dropped. Ventress saw the Tech Marine working. He realized what was about to happen. He keyed the all channels vox. "Belay that order. Do not detonate." The backlash will, the warning was cut short by the sun. It was not a chemical explosion. It was the release of a star's worth of heat in a microsecond. The base of the Tree of Souls vanished. The thermal bloom vaporized the wood, the water, and the rock. A column of white fire shot up into the sky. It punched through the clouds and burned the atmosphere. The shockwave hit the battlefield. It knocked Marines off their feet. It tossed land raiders onto their sides like toys. The Na'vi closest to the tree simply ceased to exist. They were turned to ash before their nerves could register pain. But the physical explosion was the smallest part of the catastrophe. The Tree of Souls was not just a plant. It was the synaptic hub of the planetary consciousness. It was the bridge between the biology of Pandora and the energy of the warp. When it died, it screamed. The psychic scream hit everyone on the planet simultaneously. It was a sound that was not heard with ears but felt with the soul. For the Na'vi, it was a lobotomy. Every Na'vi on the battlefield collapsed. They dropped their weapons. They fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Their connection to Awa was severed violently. It was like having a part of their brain ripped out. The animals went instantly feral. The coordination vanished. The Thanators stopped attacking and started tearing at their own flesh in confusion. The Viper Wolves scattered, yelping in pain. For the humans it was different. The Inquisitor in her tank screamed as blood poured from her nose and eyes. The psychic feedback overloaded her wards. On the ships in orbit, the astropaths and navigators seized. 3 of them died instantly, their brains boiled by the surge of pain. Captain Ventress fell to one knee. His vision swam with purple static. He felt a wave of nausea and cold dread. He felt the death of something ancient and vast. The battlefield fell silent. The roar of bolters stopped. The screaming stopped. There was only the crackle of fires and the weeping of the survivors. The great Tree of Souls was gone. In its place was a crater of glass large enough to swallow a city. The glowing willows were ash. The spirit of the forest was broken. Castellan. Draco stood up. He shook the dust from his tabard. He looked at the devastation. He looked at the broken Na'vi writhing on the ground. He nodded. The idol is destroyed. The Xenos are broken. Victory. But it was not victory. It was the dinner bell. High above in the void, the remnants of the Tyranid Hive Fleet had been lurking. They had been wary. They had tasted the coordinated defense of the planet and found it difficult to digest. They had sensed the presence of the planetary mind and recognized a rival predator. But now that rival was dead. The synaptic web that protected Pandora had shattered. The psychic scream of the dying tree was a signal that the shield was down. The prey was wounded. The prey was defenseless. The hive mind did not hesitate. It did not strategize. It fed. The sensors on Draco's land raider began to shriek, but they were not detecting ground targets. They were detecting falling objects. Thousands of them. Millions of them. The sky above the battlefield turned dark again. But this time, it was not arrows. It was spores. Mycetic spores the size of dropships slammed into the battlefield. They did not land in organized patterns. They rained down indiscriminately. One smashed into a Black Templar squad, crushing 5 Marines into paste. Another hit a group of stunned Na'vi and burst open, unleashing a brood of Hormagaunts. The Tyranids did not care about sides. They saw only biomass. They saw the Marines in their cans of meat. They saw the Na'vi in their soft skin. They saw the dead animals. It was all food. Ventress looked up at the raining horror. He saw the mistake. He saw the end of the world. "Fall back," he screamed. "Defensive formation. Circle the wagons." But there was no formation to be had. The Black Templar crusade force was scattered and mixed with the broken Na'vi army. And now the Tyranids were among them. A Carnifex dragged itself out of a crater. It roared and charged a rhino. It flipped the tank over and tore open the hull with claws the size of scythes. Termagants scuttled out of the smoke-firing flesh-borer beetles. The beetles burrowed into the exposed joints of armor and ate the men inside alive. Draco tried to rally his men. "Form up on me. The Emperor protects." He charged the Carnifex. He was brave. He was a hero of the Imperium. He chopped one of the monster's arms off. But then a lictor, a stealth organism that had dropped unnoticed, appeared behind him. The feeder tendrils lashed out and grabbed Draco's helmet. The lictor pulled. The ceramite of the gorget snapped. Draco's head was ripped from his shoulders. The Castellan fell. The crusade was headless. Panic threatened to turn into a rout. The Black Templars were fierce, but without their leader and surrounded by monsters, they began to fight as individuals, not as a squad. They were dying. Ventress took command. He had to. There was no one else left. Ultramarines, secure the left flank. Templars, rally to the blue banner. Move or die. He grabbed a Black Templar standard bearer who was staggering in shock. "Give me that." Ventress took the banner of the crusade. He waved it high. "To me, we fight our way out." The retreat from the Valley of Souls was a nightmare that would be studied in military academies for 1,000 years as an example of a fighting withdrawal. The Astartes formed a wedge. They put the surviving heavy armor on the outside. They put the wounded in the center, and then they walked. They walked through a sea of chitin and claws. They fired until their bolters glowed red hot. They fought with combat knives when the ammo ran dry. But Ventress did something that violated every protocol of the Black Templars. He did not just save the humans. As the column moved, he saw Jake Sully. The Avatar was on his knees staring blankly at the burning crater of the tree. He was catatonic from the psychic shock. Neytiri was trying to drag him, screaming at him to move. A Genestealer was sprinting towards them. Ventress did not think. He reacted. He broke formation. He sprinted 10 meters and shoulder-checked the Genestealer. He raised his bolt pistol and blew its head off. He grabbed Jake by the harness of his avatar body. He grabbed Neytiri by the arm. "Get inside the perimeter," he roared. A Black Templar sergeant saw this. "Let the Zenus die, traitor." Ventress shot the sergeant a look that could melt steel. "We need them. They know the terrain. If you want to live to pray another day, you will help me load them onto that rhino." The sergeant hesitated. Then he looked at the swarm of Tyranids closing in. He spat on the ground and helped lift the massive avatar body onto the tank. It was not mercy. It was desperation. The column fought its way out of the valley. They left thousands of dead behind. They left the pride of the Black Templars in the mud. They left the body of Castellan Draco to be dissolved by digestion pools. They reached the high ground as night fell. The Tyranids did not pursue them up the cliffs. The swarm was too busy eating the dead. The sound of crunching bone and tearing flesh echoed in the dark. They made it back to the outpost at dawn. It was a wreck. The Tyranids had dropped spores on the base too. The defensive turrets were smoking. The perimeter wall was breached in 3 places. The human crew had fought them off, but the cost had been high. Bodies were stacked like cordwood near the incinerators. Ventress marched into the command center. He was covered in black alien blood, blue Na'vi blood, and red human blood. He looked like a demon. Inquisitor Valeria was there. She was sitting in a chair holding a cloth to her bleeding nose. She looked pale and small. Her arrogance was gone. "Report," she croaked. "The crusade is destroyed," Ventress said. His voice was flat. "Castellan Draco is dead. 60% of the Astartes force is dead or missing. All heavy armor is lost. The Tree of Souls is destroyed, and the psychic backlash has lobotomized the indigenous population." Valeria nodded slowly. She did not argue. "And the enemy? The Tyranids are feeding. They are growing. Every Na'vi they eat, every Marine they eat, gives them more biomass. They are evolving. I saw a warrior strain that had developed a shield arm similar to a Templar storm shield. They are learning from us." "And Ewa?" Valeria asked. "Is the network truly dead?" Ventress looked at the tactical map. The planet was dark. The glowing lines of the network were gone. But there was a faint pulse, a weak, erratic heartbeat coming from the deep ocean. "It is not dead," he said. "It is in a coma. We broke the planet's mind, Inquisitor. We destroyed the only thing that was holding the biosphere together. Now we are trapped on a rock with 1 billion hungry monsters and no way to call for help." "Why no help?" Valeria asked. "The fleet." Ventress pointed to the sky. "Look at the sensors. The Tyranid bioships have moved. They have formed a blockade grid. They are not attacking the ships yet. They are jamming us. The shadow in the warp has descended. The death of the tree amplified it. We are cut off. No astropathic messages. No warp travel. We are alone." Valeria closed her eyes. She let the cloth drop from her face. "Then we prepare for the end. We die as servants of the Emperor." "No," Ventress said. He slammed a fresh magazine into his bolt pistol. "We do not die yet. We survive. But the rules have changed. The Codex Astartes does not apply here anymore. The Inquisition's authority does not apply here anymore. This is a survival situation, and I am taking command." Valeria opened her eyes. She looked at him. She saw the killer in his eyes. She saw the man who had dragged the Zenus King out of hell. She did not argue. "What are your orders, Lord Commander?" she asked, with a trace of mockery that was also respect. Ventress turned to the room. "Ration controls are in effect immediately. Half rations for everyone. Astartes included. Strip the damaged vehicles for parts. We need every gun working. and bring the Na'vi survivors inside the walls. The surviving Templars in the room grumbled. Xenos in the base. It is heresy. It is logic, Ventress shouted. The planet is dead. The plants are dying. The animals are feral. The Na'vi can't survive out there anymore. And we can't survive without them. They can breathe the air. They can scout. And if we fix what we broke, maybe they can wake the planet up again. Fix it? Grace Augustine asked. She had entered the room leaning on a crutch. She looked terrible. Her avatar was in a medical tank, unresponsive. She was in her human body. You can't fix a lobotomy, Captain. You burned the brain. We burned one lobe, Ventress said. You said the network is distributed. You said it has backups. Where is the backup? Grace looked at the map. She pointed to the ocean. The Eastern Sea. There is a reef. The Atokarina grow there in massive numbers. It's a secondary hub, but it's underwater. We don't have the equipment to get there. And the Na'vi. She looked at Jake, who was sitting in the corner staring at his hands. Jake was broken. The link had traumatized him. The Na'vi are gone. Their souls are quiet. They are just bodies now. Then we wake them up, Ventress said. We find a way. Because if we don't, the Tyranids will eat us all in 3 days. The next 48 hours were a study in misery. The rain turned acidic. The destruction of the Tree of Souls had released geothermal chemicals into the atmosphere. The armor of the Space Marines began to pit and corrode. The human soldiers developed blisters on their skin. The water filters failed and had to be rebuilt by the Mechanicus adepts using parts from a coffee machine and a land speeder engine. C'était fin tournois. The Na'vi refugees were huddled in the cargo bays. They sat in silence. They did not eat. They did not sleep. They just stared. It was unnerving. They were like dolls with the strings cut. Neytiri sat with them. She was the only one who seemed to have some spark left, perhaps because her rage was stronger than her connection. She sharpened her knife over and over until the blade was a sliver of metal. She looked at the humans with a hatred that was pure and absolute. She did not kill them only because Ventress had told her that Jake needed them. On the second night, a perimeter alarm tripped. It was not a Tyranid. It was a single figure walking out of the forest. It was Tute. The war leader was covered in burns. His left arm was missing. He dragged his spear behind him. He walked up to the gate and collapsed. Ventress went out to get him. He brought the warrior inside. The medics worked on him. When Tute woke up, he grabbed Ventress's gorge. You, he rasped. You let them burn it. I tried to stop them, Ventress said. Tried is not enough, Tute spat. The world is grey. The song is gone. I cannot hear her. I cannot hear my ancestors. It is just silence. We can bring it back, Ventress said. We think there is a way. The ocean. Tute laughed weakly. The ocean belongs to the Metkaina. They will not help you. They will kill you. They felt the scream too. They know what the Sky People did. You are going to help us talk to them, Ventress said. Why would I do that? Why should I not just let the demons eat you? Because revenge is empty if there is no one left to remember it, Ventress said. And because you are a warrior, and warriors do not quit until the blood is gone. Tute stared at the ceiling. He looked at his missing arm. He looked at the humans running around in panic. He made a low sound in his throat. Get me a weapon, he said, and get me food. If I am to die fighting alongside demons, I will not do it on an empty stomach. Strategic reality set in on day 4. The food stores were critically low. The ammunition for the heavy bolters was at 15%. The Tyranids had consumed the biomass of the dead army and had begun to spawn new horrors. Flying strains were testing the air defenses. Gargoyles cluttered the sensors. The blockade in orbit was tightening. Ventress called a council. He had Valeria, Grace, Jake, who was barely functional, Tute, and the surviving Black Templar sergeant, a grim man named Grimaldus. "We cannot hold here," Ventress said. "The base is a trap. The Tyranids know where we are. They are massing for a final wave. We need to move." "Move where?" Grimaldus asked. "The forest is death. The ocean is miles away." "We go to the coast," Ventress said. "We take the remaining Valkyries and the Thunderhawks. We overload them. We ferry everyone we can to the island chain. The Tyranids struggle with deep water combat. It buys us a defensive moat, and it puts us close to the secondary hub." "It is a retreat," Grimaldus growled. "The Black Templars do not retreat. The Black Templars died in a valley because they were stupid." Ventress slammed his hand on the table. The metal dented. "I am done with your pride, Sergeant. Your Castellan is dead. Your crusade is a failure. You want to redeem yourself. You protect the civilians. You guard the rear. You die so that the species survives. That is the job. Do you understand?" Grimaldus glared at him. His hand twitched towards his bolt pistol. The room held its breath. Then the sergeant nodded. "As you command. But the chaplain will hear of this. If we live, you can tell him yourself," Ventress said. They began the evacuation. It was chaotic. The Na'vi had to be herded like cattle. They were listless. The humans were terrified. They loaded the dropships until the engines whined in protest. They left behind everything that wasn't essential. Scientific data, personal letters, extra uniforms, all abandoned. They took only guns, ammo, and food. As the last transport lifted off, the Tyranids broke the perimeter. A swarm of Hormagaunts poured over the walls like a liquid tide. They flooded the courtyard. They tore apart the empty buildings. Ventress watched from the ramp of the Thunderhawk. He saw the place where he had first met Jake Sully. He saw the place where he had tried to build a peace. It was all being eaten. The outpost was gone. The flight to the coast was harrowing. Flying Tyranids harassed them the whole way. The door gunners fired continuously. A Valkyrie carrying 30 wounded soldiers was hit by acid spit. Its wing melted. It spiraled down into the jungle and exploded. There was no attempt at rescue. They kept flying. They reached the coast. The ocean was grey and angry. The storms caused by the tree's death had whipped up massive waves. They landed on a rocky island chain that was connected by sandbars. It was bleak. It was wet. But it was defensible. The Metcaina clan was there. They emerged from the water riding their eyeless. They were green-skinned, with thick tails and finned arms. They held spears of bone. They surrounded the landing party. They did not look friendly. Their leader, Tonawari, stood on the beach. He looked at the humans. He looked at the broken forest Na'vi. "You bring the death here," Tonawari said. His voice was heavy with the same sorrow that infected them all. "We felt the scream. We felt the Great Mother fall silent. Why should we let you land? Why should we not drown you? Because we are the only thing standing between you and the swarm," Jake Sully said. He had stepped off the transport. He was in his avatar body, but he was limping. He looked like a ghost. "The Sky People broke the world, Tonawari. I know. I was there. I couldn't stop them. But the swarm is coming. And it doesn't care if you are forest or reef. It eats everything." Tonawari looked at the horizon. He could see the smoke rising from the burning jungle miles away. He could see the dark clouds of spores moving toward the sea. He looked at his people. They were scared. The silence of Ewa terrified them more than the war. "Land," Tonawari said, "but do not think you are guests. You are bait. You will stand on the rocks and you will fight. And if you fall, we will push your bodies into the deep so you do not poison our waters. The Imperium had a new base. It was a wet rock in the middle of a hostile ocean. They had no walls. They had almost no food. Their allies were catatonic or hostile, and the Tyranid hive mind, having finished its meal at the outpost, turned its billion eyes towards the sea. It began to evolve swimmers. It began to change the density of its monster's bones. It learned, it adapted, and it began the long march to the water. In the command tent, Grace Augustine was looking at a sample of ocean water under a microscope. She called Ventress over. "Look," she said. Ventress looked. He saw the tiny microorganisms. They were moving sluggishly. They were dying. "The ocean is dying too," Grace said. "The network crash is affecting the plankton. If the base of the food chain collapses, the atmosphere goes next. The oxygen production stops. We have maybe a week before the air becomes unbreathable for humans, and maybe 2 weeks before everything on this planet suffocates. So we have a time limit," Ventress said. Grace nodded. "A hard one. We fix the network or we choke." Ventress walked out of the tent. He looked at the grey ocean. He looked at the Space Marines cleaning their weapons in the rain. He looked at the Na'vi staring into the void. The first real catastrophe was not the battle. It was not the explosion. It was the realization that the war was no longer about conquest. It was about breath. The Grand Crusade of the Black Templars had reduced the glory of the Imperium to a desperate gasp for air, and the only way to get it back was to do the one thing the Imperium forbade above all else. They had to resurrect a Xanos god. Ventress checked his bolt pistol. He had 3 magazines left. Enough, he thought. Enough to save a world, or enough to end my own suffering when the air runs out. He holstered the weapon and went to find the tech priest. It was time to commit some real heresy. The ocean was not a sanctuary. It was a waiting room for death. The ash from the burning continents drifted down onto the waves, turning the turquoise waters of the Metcaina territory into a slurry of grey sludge. The sun was a dim red eye behind the pollution clouds. On the rocky island chain that formed the last redoubt of the Imperium on Pandora, the air was already tasting stale. The oxygen scrubbers on the surviving Astartes armor were working overtime to filter out the toxins released by the dying planetary network. Captain Ventress walked the perimeter of the largest island. It was a bleak spit of volcanic rock and sand, now crowded with the wreckage of 2 civilizations. Crates of bolter ammunition sat next to woven baskets of dried fish. A parked Thunderhawk gunship, its hull pitted by acid rain, provided shelter for a dozen catatonic Na'vi orphans. The Metcaina clan looked on with hostility. They stood in the shallows, their spears ready, watching the Sky People pollute their home. They had allowed the landing only because Tonawari had commanded it, but their patience was eroding faster than the shoreline. The strategic situation was a mathematical impossibility. Ventress ran the numbers in his head for the 1,000th time. They had 312 human survivors, including the support crew and the walking wounded. They had 41 combat-capable Space Marines, a mix of his own Ultramarines and the survivors of the Black Templar crusade. They had limited fuel, failing water purifiers, and food for 6 days. Facing them was a Tyranid Hive Fleet remnant that had consumed the main continent and was now adapting to the aquatic environment. The orbital blockade was absolute. The shadow in the warp blocked all psychic communication. They were trapped in a box, and the water was rising. In the command tent, which was just a tarp stretched between 2 rocks, Magos Deltrian was arguing with Grace Augustine. The tech priest looked more machine than man, his red robe stained with oil and sea salt. Grace looked like a corpse walking, Her human body was frail, her skin grey from the poor air quality. "The biology is failing," Deltrian stated. His voice was a flat, synthesized drone. "I have monitored the atmospheric composition. The oxygen levels have dropped by 4% in the last 24 hours. The plankton are dying. The planetary respiratory system has suffered a catastrophic seizure. At this rate, the atmosphere will be toxic to baseline humans in 96 hours. The Astartes will survive longer, but eventual asphyxiation is 100% probable." "We know the problem," Grace snapped. She coughed, a wet, hacking sound. "We need a solution. The network is down. The Tree of Souls was the CPU. The Templars blew it up. The backup hub is the Ancestor Cove, the underwater spirit tree, but it's dormant. It's in shock. It needs a jumpstart." "It needs the motive force," Deltrian corrected. "It is a biological machine spirit. It has suffered a trauma. It requires a reboot. I have calculated the necessary voltage and the ritual protocols. We can interface with the root system. We can force the network to restart." "Force it?" Grace looked at him with horror. "You're talking about electrocuting a god. You're talking about hacking into the soul of the planet." "I'm talking about survival, Doctor," Deltrian replied. "The Omnissiah knows no distinction between the biological and the mechanical. Both are systems. Both can be repaired, or they can be allowed to fail. Choose." Ventress stepped into the tent. "Do it," he said. Grace turned to him. "Uriel, you can't. If we force the connection, we don't know what will happen. We could lobotomize the planet permanently. We could turn Awa into a vegetable." "The planet is already dying, Grace," Ventress said. His tone was not cruel, just final. "Look at the Na'vi. Look at Jake. They are empty shells. If we do nothing, they die. If we try this, they might live. It is a tactical necessity." "Magos, what do you need?" "I need access to the submerged hub," Deltrian said. "It is located at a depth of 200 meters, in a trench protected by heavy currents. My servo skulls cannot navigate the pressure. I need a delivery vehicle, and I need a guide." Ventress looked at the map. The trench was 3 kilometers off the coast. In normal times, it would be a short swim for a Na'vi. But the ocean was not safe anymore. "I will get you the guide," Ventress said. "Prepare your equipment. We dive in 1 hour." Ventress found Tonawari sitting on the edge of the rocks, sharpening a spear made of bone. The Metkaina leader did not look up as the massive space marine approached. The tension between them was a physical weight. "I need you to take us to the Ancestor Cove," Ventress said. Tonawari stopped sharpening. He looked at the grey water. "You want to go to the sacred place, the place where our ancestors sleep. You want to bring your metal machines there. We want to wake the Great Mother," Ventress said. "She is sleeping because of what my people did. I know that. But if she does not wake, the ocean dies. Your people die." Tonawari stood up. He was tall, powerful, built for the pressure of the deep, but his eyes were filled with a deep, crushing sadness. "She does not sleep, Sky Person. She screams. I hear it in the water. A silent scream that breaks the heart. You think you can fix this with your machines. You think you can repair a spirit like you repair your guns. I think we have to try," Ventress said. "Or we can sit here and wait for the end. Is that the way of the water? To drift until the current takes you?" Tonawari bared his teeth. "Do not speak to me of the way. You brought the fire. You brought the death. But..." He looked back at the cluster of women and children huddled near the Thunderhawk. "But you are right about the end. It is coming. If we must die, let us die trying to save her. I will take you, but only you, and the machine man. No weapons." "No," Ventress said. "We take weapons. The enemy is adapting. I will not walk into the dark unarmed." Tonawari stared at him. then nodded once. "Come, the tide is turning." The expedition team was small. Ventress, Margos Deltrian, Grace Augustine, wearing a pressure suit salvaged from the crashed shuttle, and Tonawari. They did not have a submarine. They had a modified rhino transport that the tech priest had hastily sealed with plasteel and gaskets. It was not a boat. It was a metal brick that would sink to the bottom and drive along the sea floor. It was a coffin if anything went wrong. They drove the rhino off the edge of the sandbar. The water rushed over the viewports, dark and murky. The engine groaned as the treads bit into the sand. They sank. 10 meters, 20, 50. The light from the surface faded into a gloomy twilight. Inside the rhino, the air was cold and smelled of recycled sweat. Deltrian was hooked into the vehicle's cogitator, monitoring the descent. Grace was staring out the thick glass of the viewport, her hands trembling. Ventress sat with his bolter across his knees, checking the seals on his armor. He was essentially wearing a tank. If the rhino breached, his armor would protect him from the pressure, but he would be walking home. Outside, Tonawari rode his ILU, circling the slow-moving tank. He was the only thing moving with grace in the darkness. The headlights of the rhino cut through the gloom, illuminating strange fish that darted away in panic. The coral reefs were grey. The vibrant colours of Pandora were bleaching out as the network failed. "We are approaching the drop-off," Deltrian announced. "Gradient increasing. Descent to 200 meters initiating." The rhino tipped forward. The treads scraped and sparked against the rock. They went down into the trench. The pressure on the hull groaned. Rivets popped with sounds like gunshots. Ventress watched the depth gauge. 150 meters. 175. 200. They hit the bottom of the trench with a heavy thud. Silt billowed up, blinding them for a moment. When it cleared, they saw it. The ancestor tree of the ocean. It was smaller than the Tree of Souls, but it was beautiful. Its fronds were long ribbons of bioluminescence that waved in the current. But the light was dim. It flickered like a dying candle. The spirit of the ocean was barely holding on. Ventress opened the rear hatch. The airlock cycled. Water flooded the chamber. He engaged his magnetic boots. He walked out onto the ocean floor, moving slowly against the resistance of the water. He was a giant of blue metal in a world of silence. Deltrian followed, his mechadendrites waving like the tentacles of a squid. Grace followed, towed by a small propulsion unit. Tonawari met them at the base of the tree. He gestured to the roots. They were dark. The connection points were closed. Deltrian floated forward. He extended a mechadendrite, tipped with a data spike. "I must make a physical connection," he broadcast over the Vox. "I must interface with the biological nervous system. Cover me." "Why do you need cover?" Grace asked, her voice tinny in the comms. "There's nothing down here." Ventress looked at the motion tracker on his HUD. It was pinging. Soft, ghostly returns at the edge of the sensor range. "Because we are never alone," he said. Deltrian jammed the spike into the root of the spirit tree. The tree shuddered. A pulse of light travelled up the trunk, but it was harsh, jagged. The biology resisted the metal. "The machine spirit is recalcitrant," Deltrian droned, "initiating the rite of awakening, engaging the Omnissiah's touch." He sent a surge of electrical current into the tree. High voltage, calculated to stimulate the neural pathways. The tree flashed, and then the dark came alive. The motion tracker screamed. Ventress spun around. Out of the darkness of the trench, shapes were emerging. They were not fish, they were Tyranids, but they were changed. They were sleek, finned, armored with chitin that looked like crab shells. Their claws were webbed. Their eyes were black voids. Ripper swarms evolved for water, and behind them, larger shapes. Tyranid warriors with propulsion sacks and harpoon guns. The hive mind had not just been waiting, it had been hunting. Contact, Ventress roared. Defensive fire. He raised his bolter. The specially modified mass reactive rounds were designed to function underwater, but the range was terrible. He waited until the first warrior was 10 meters away and fired. The water slowed the bolt, but not enough to save the alien. The round hit the warrior in the chest and detonated. Blue blood clouded the water. But there were dozens of them. They swam with terrifying speed, darting around the slow-moving space marine. A harpoon fired from the dark-struck Ventress in the shoulder pauldron, cracking the ceramite. He grabbed the line and yanked, pulling the alien shooter toward him. He drew his combat knife and gutted the creature as it flew past. "Keep working, Magos," Ventress shouted. "Tonowari, protect the priest." Tonowari was a blur of motion. In the water, he was faster than the Astartes. He moved like a shark. He stabbed his spear through the eye of a ripper, spun, and slashed the throat of a warrior. He was fighting for his god, and he was lethal. Grace was hiding behind the bulk of the rhino, trying to stay out of the line of fire. She watched as Deltrian worked. The tech priest ignored the battle. He was chanting in binary, sending command codes into the biological network. He was trying to override the trauma with logic. "I'm detecting a response," Deltrian said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "The neural architecture is accepting the override. The motive force is flowing, but the resistance is significant. The patient is fighting the cure." "It's not a cure," Grace screamed. "You're hurting her." "Pain is data," Deltrian replied. Resuming transmission. On the surface, the situation was deteriorating into a massacre. The Tyranid assault on the sandbars had begun. It was not a subtle infiltration. It was a tsunami of flesh. Sergeant Grimaldus of the Black Templars stood on the makeshift barricade. He held his chainsword in one hand and a bolt pistol in the other. He looked at the waves. The water was boiling with shapes. Thousands of hormagaunts, modified with webbed feet, were paddling toward the shore. They looked like a carpet of insects on the water. "They are coming, brothers," Grimaldus roared. "Let them break upon our hate. No pity, no remorse, no fear." The Black Templars opened fire. The heavy bolters mounted on the rocks churned the water into red foam. The first wave of Tyranids died in the surf. Their bodies clogged the shallows, but the second wave climbed over the dead, and the third wave climbed over them. The battle became a melee at the water's edge. The Tyranids lunged out of the foam, screeching. The Na'vi refugees, catatonic and helpless, were in the line of fire. The Metkaina warriors fought beside the Space Marines, thrusting their spears into the horde. Tute was there. He had tied his one remaining hand to his spear. He stood in the surf, water swirling around his waist. He screamed a war cry that no one answered. He impaled a gaunt, kicked it off, and impaled the next. He was looking for death, but death was busy elsewhere. The sky above them darkened, not with spores this time, but with flying horrors. Gargoyles swooped down, spitting acid. They targeted the heavy weapon teams. A space marine manning a heavy bolter screamed as acid melted his helmet. He fell, and the gun went silent. Grimaldus saw the line buckling. "Back," he ordered. "Fall back to the high ground. Defend the Thunderhawk." They retreated up the rocky slope. The circle was shrinking. The Metkaina were dying in droves. Their bone weapons shattered against the thick chitin of the evolved Tyranids. They needed miracles, but all they had were bullets, and the bullets were running out. Underwater, the Battle of the Trench was reaching a crisis point. Ventress was surrounded. His armor was leaking. A lucky strike from a bone sword had pierced his thigh seal. The cold water was numbing his leg. He had killed 20 Tyranids, but more were coming from the dark. Tonawari was wounded. A harpoon had grazed his side. He was tiring. "Deltrian," Ventress yelled. "How long?" "The connection is stabilizing," the tech priest said. "I am bypassing the emotional centers. I am routing the consciousness through the logical cortex. I am uploading the suppression protocols." "Suppression protocols?" Grace asked. "What are you doing?" "I am removing the fear," Deltrian said. "I am removing the hesitation. I am optimizing the planetary defense response. Awakening in 3, 2, 1. He drove the spike deeper. The tree screamed. It was not a psychic scream of pain this time. It was a scream of electronic rage. The light of the spirit tree turned from a soft blue to a harsh, blinding white. The pulse shot out from the tree, traveling through the water at the speed of sound. It hit the ocean floor. It hit the coral. It hit every living thing in the radius. Ventress felt the pulse hit his mind. It was cold. It was hard. It felt like the touch of cold iron. The Tyranids felt it too. The swarm paused. The hive-mind connection wavered. For a second, the alien control was disrupted by the sheer violence of the planetary awakening. And then the planet fought back. But it did not fight like a mother protecting her children. It fought like a machine exterminating a virus. The coral reef exploded into life. Sharp spines shot out of the rock, impaling the Tyranids. The fish in the water turned instantly aggressive. Schools of small, harmless fish swarmed the Tyranid warriors, biting out their eyes. The seaweed wrapped around the aliens, dragging them down, crushing them. It was effective. It was brutal, but it was indiscriminate. A Metkaina warrior, fighting near the tree, was grabbed by a vine. It crushed his chest just as easily as it crushed the Tyranid next to him. Tonawari saw this. "Great Mother," he cried, "what have you done?" Deltrian pulled his spike free. "The awakening is complete. The system is online. Defense protocols are active." On the surface, the tide turned. The water itself seemed to revolt against the invaders. Massive sea creatures, disturbed from the deep, surfaced. An Akula shark the size of a submarine breached the water and swallowed a cluster of Tyranids whole. The birds in the sky, previously scared silent, dove onto the gargoyles, tearing their wings. The Na'vi refugees on the island gasped. Their eyes opened. The lobotomy was broken. The connection was back. But as Jake Sully's eyes snapped open, he didn't look relieved. He looked terrified. He grabbed his head. "It's too loud," he whispered. "It's too loud." She's screaming orders. "Kill, kill, kill." The Na'vi warriors, previously catatonic, stood up. They grabbed weapons. They charged the Tyranid lines. But they moved with a jerky, unnatural coordination. They didn't shout. They didn't cry. They moved like automatons. They threw themselves at the enemy with zero regard for self-preservation. Grimaldus watched as a Na'vi woman leaped onto a Tyranid warrior, pulling the pin on a grenade she had picked up. She blew herself up to kill the beast. There was no hesitation, no fear. "What is this sorcery?" Grimaldus muttered. "It is the Omnissiah's work." A tech priest adept near him said reverently. "They have been optimized." The Tyranids were pushed back. The sheer ferocity of the planetary counterattack, combined with the Imperial firepower, broke the wave. The swarm retreated into the deep water, confusing by the sudden aggression of the biomass they were trying to eat. Ventress and his team surfaced in the Rhino. They drove up onto the blood-soaked sandbar. Ventress blew the hatch and stumbled out. He ripped off his helmet. The air smelled of ozone and copper, but it tasted richer. The oxygen levels were rising. The plankton were blooming with manic speed. Grace Augustine crawled out of the Rhino. She ripped off her helmet and vomited onto the sand. "What did you do?" she sobbed. "That wasn't Iowa. That wasn't her. It was a strategic necessity," Deltrian said, emerging behind her. "We saved the patient. The personality was a casualty of the procedure." Ventress looked at the Na'vi. They were standing in rows, waiting for orders. They looked at the forest across the water. Their eyes were glowing with a harsh white light, mirroring the tree in the deep. Jake Sully walked up to Ventress. He walked stiffly. He looked at the Space Marine with eyes that were human, but trapped behind a wall of alien static. "She is awake," Jake said. His voice was flat. "She sees the infection. She wants to cut it out." "Good," Ventress said. "That's what we need." "She sees the Tyranids as infection," Jake continued. "But she sees you as infection too. She sees the metal. She sees the off-worlders. She is running the numbers, Captain. And the numbers say you have to go." Ventress looked at the Black Templars, then at the Metkayina, then at the glowing eyes of the forest Na'vi. He realized the chain reaction was not finished. They had saved the world from the Tyranids, but they had turned the goddess of Pandora into a logic engine, and logic had no room for sentiment. "The Tyranid blockade is still in orbit," Ventress said. "If she attacks us now, we all die. Can you control her? Can you talk to her?" Jake shook his head. "You don't talk to a storm, Uriel. You weather it. She is gathering the biomass. She is building an army. Not just Na'vi, everything. She is going to launch a counter-offensive, and she expects us to be the vanguard." "The vanguard?" Grimaldus asked, stepping forward. "The meat shield," Jake clarified. "She wants the metal men to break the Tyranid line. If we do, she will finish them. If we don't, she will recycle our bodies to grow more warriors." Ventress looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the blood-red ocean. The reprieve was over. The alliance was over. Now there was only the mission. "Signal the company," Ventress said. "Reload weapons. We are moving out." "Where?" Grimaldus asked. "To the mainland," Ventress said. "We are going to punch a hole in the Hive Fleet. We are going to give this machine goddess her war. And we are going to pray that when the smoke clears, she remembers who saved her life." The survivors of humanity stood on a rock in a hostile ocean, caught between a devouring swarm and a cold, awakened god. The real war had just begun. The flotilla of the damned moved across the grey water under a sky that looked like a bruise. The modified Thunderhawks and Valkyries flew low, their engines kicking up spray that smelled of sulphur and dead fish. Below them, the Metkayina clan rode their Elus, but the playful leaps and cries of the past were gone. The riders moved in a perfect V formation, their faces slack, their eyes glowing with the harsh white light of the rebooted network. They did not look like warriors anymore. They looked like torpedoes made of meat. On the decks of the commandeered barges and the few remaining seaworthy rafts, the Imperial survivors checked their weapons. They were quiet. There was nothing to say. They were sailing into the mouth of hell to fight monsters, alongside allies that terrified them more than the enemy. Captain Ventress stood on the prow of the lead barge. The salt spray stung his face, washing away the dried blood from the island defense. He looked at the coastline of the mainland. It was unrecognizable. The lush green rainforest was gone. In its place was a landscape of twisted purple growth, capillary towers that pumped alien spores into the air, and vast pools of digestive acid that bubbled with the dissolved remains of the ecosystem. The Tyranids had not just occupied the land, they were digesting it. They were stripping the planet down to the bedrock to feed the hunger of the Hive Fleet. Jake Sully stood next to Ventress. The Avatar body was trembling slightly. It was a constant, low-frequency shiver, like a machine running at too high a voltage. Jake's eyes were the only thing that looked human. The rest of him was stiff, held in check by the overwhelming will of the machine goddess. "She is loud today," Jake said. His voice was flat, devoid of the passion he used to have. "She sees the digestion pools. She sees the loss of biomass. She is calculating the deficit. She is angry," Ventress asked. "Anger is a biological inefficiency," Jake replied. The word sounded wrong coming from his mouth. "She is not angry. She is correcting an error. We are the correction tool." The fleet hit the beachhead at dawn. The Tyranids were waiting. They had sensed the approach through the vibration of the water and the disturbance in the air. The beach was lined with termagants and hormagaunts, thousands of them, chirping and clicking in a carpet of chitin. Behind them stood the warriors, their venom cannons dripping with acid. And towering over the tree line were the heavy support beasts, the exocrines and the biovores, living artillery pieces that launch spore mines into the air. The first wave of the assault was not the Space Marines. It was the optimized Na'vi. The landing craft dropped their ramps and the indigenous warriors charged. They did not scream. They did not take cover. They ran in a straight line, shoulder to shoulder, firing their scavenged autoguns and bows with mechanical precision. Ventress watched in horror and awe. A Na'vi warrior took a flesh-borer beetle to the shoulder. In the old days, he would have screamed, fallen, called for a medic. Now, the warrior didn't even break stride. He reached up, tore the burrowing beetle out of his own flesh, along with a chunk of muscle, threw it aside and kept firing. Another warrior had her legs blown off by a venom cannon. She did not go into shock. She dragged herself forward on her hands, still shooting, until a second shot vaporized her head. "They are utilizing pain suppression protocols," Margos Deltrian noted over the Vox. He sounded pleased. "Efficiency has increased by 400%. They are trading lifespan for combat effectiveness. It is a logical exchange. It is a meat grinder," Grace Augustine whispered. She was in the command rhino, watching the feeds. "They aren't people anymore. They're just ammo." The Na'vi wave hit the Tyranid line. It was an explosion of violence. The Tyranids were used to prey that ran, or prey that fought with fear. They were not used to prey that fought with the cold logic of a machine. The Na'vi threw themselves onto the scything talons of the aliens to pin them down so the warrior behind could get a kill shot. They jammed grenades into the mouths of beasts and held them shut until they detonated. Ventress led the Astartes ashore in the wake of the suicide charge. Ultramarines, spread formation, used the Xenos as cover, advanced to the tree line. The Space Marines moved up the beach, firing over the heads of the dying Na'vi. The heavy bolters of the Black Templars tore chunks out of the Tyranid warriors. Grimdark was in the thick of it, wielding a chainsword he had scavenged from a fallen brother. He chopped a hormagaunt in half and kicked the body away. "They fight well," Grimdark roared. "For savages, they fight well." "They aren't fighting, Sergeant," Ventress shouted back. "They are being spent." They pushed past the beach and into the ruined jungle. The air was thick with toxic spores. The respirators of the humans were clogging. The surviving Black Templars were chanting, their voices competing with the screech of the aliens. They reached the edge of the first digestion pool. It was a lake of yellow acid, a kilometer wide. On the far side rose a capillary tower, a massive spire of bone and flesh that reached into the clouds, pumping dissolved biomass up to the ships in orbit. "That is the target," Ventress ordered. "We sever the feeding tube. We cut off the flow to the fleet." But the Tyranids knew the value of the tower. From the purple undergrowth emerged the elite guard. 3 Tyrant guard, massive walls of living armor lumbered forward, and behind them, a hive tyrant walked. It was 4 meters of death, armed with a bone sword and a heavy venom cannon. It radiated psychic menace. The shadow in the warp deepened. The humans felt a headache spike behind their eyes. Jake Sully stopped. He grabbed his head. The connection to the new Awa wavered under the pressure of the Hive tyrant's psychic aura. "She is blind," Jake screamed. "The shadow is blocking her. She cannot coordinate." The Na'vi line faltered. Without the central control signal, the optimized warriors froze. They stood still in the middle of the firefight, their eyes flickering. The Tyranids pounced. In seconds, 50 Na'vi were butchered. "We are losing the meat shield," Grimaldus yelled. "Heavy weapons. Target the tyrant." The Hive tyrant laughed, a psychic sound that bled into their minds. It raised its venom cannon and fired. The shot hit a cluster of Black Templars. 3 Astartes dissolved into slush inside their armor. Ventress saw the tactical collapse happening. They were stuck in the open. The Na'vi were rebooting. The Tyranids were advancing. He needed to break the psychic blockade. He needed to give Awa her eyes back. "Deltrian," Ventress shouted. "The tyrant is jamming the signal. Can you boost the network?" "I cannot boost the signal strength without a hardline connection," Deltrian replied. "I need to interface with a local node." "There." Ventress pointed to a blackened, twisted stump of a tree near the digestion pool. It was dead, burned by the Tyranids. But the roots went deep. "Is that a node?" "It is damaged, but the root architecture remains," Deltrian said. Ventress turned to his squad. "Squad Argeman, suppressive fire. Grimaldus, take the left flank. Buy us 2 minutes." The Astartes charged. It was suicide, but it was the only way. They poured fire into the tyrant guard. The monsters shrugged off bolter shells like rain. Grimaldus leaped onto the back of a tyrant guard, jamming his chainsword into the joint of its neck. The beast thrashed, throwing him off, but the blade stuck, revving and chewing into flesh. Ventress and Deltrian sprinted for the stump. Acid spit sizzled on the ground around them. A termagant lunged at Deltrian. Ventress blew it apart with his bolt pistol. They reached the tree. Deltrian extended his mechadendrites. He jacked into the charred wood. "I am attempting to bridge the connection," the tech priest said. "I am routing the signal through my own cogitator banks to filter out the psychic interference." "Do it!" Ventress yelled, firing at the advancing horde. Deltrian engaged the interface, and then he paused. "Magos?" Ventress asked. "There is a request," Deltrian said. His voice was strange. "The planetary mind detects the data within my cortex. It detects the tactical algorithms, the weapons schematics, the Imperial Guard infantry doctrine. It is requesting access." "Access?" Ventress fired again. "Access to what?" "To everything," Deltrian said. "To the standard template construct fragments I possess. To the history of warfare stored in my memory coils. She wants to know how we fight. She wants to know how to win." Ventress looked at the battle. Grimaldus was down, his armor cracked. The Hive tyrant was advancing on the main Imperial line. Jake Sully was on his knees, screaming in static. "If you give her that data," Ventress said, realizing the horror of the question, "she learns how to make war like us." "She is waiting," Deltrian said. "She offers a transaction. The data for the victory." "Give it to her," Ventress said. It was a small choice. 3 words spoken in the heat of battle. A tactical decision made to save 100 lives. But it was the choice that changed the history of the sector forever. Deltrian opened his mind. He lowered the firewalls of his logic banks. He allowed the raw, cold consciousness of the awakened planet to flow through his cybernetics and read the files of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The effect was instantaneous. The Na'vi warriors did not just wake up. They changed. They stopped fighting like drones. They started fighting like soldiers. The confused mob of Na'vi suddenly formed perfect fire teams. They utilized cover and suppressive fire techniques that were standard doctrine for the Cadian shock troopers. They flanked the Tyranids using maneuvers that were written in the Codex Astartes. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the biology. Awa had the data. She understood the schematics of a bolter. She understood the chemical composition of promethium. She understood the density of ceramite. And she was a goddess of biology. She could not forge metal, but she could grow bone. The ground around the tree stump erupted. Vines shot out, but they were not just vines. They were thick, muscular tubes that pulsed with high pressure. They wrapped around the arms of the Na'vi warriors. They fused with their flesh. Jake Sully stood up. He gasped as a vine latched onto his avatar's arm. He watched as the plant matter shifted, hardened and calcified. In seconds, his arm was encased in a shell of green chitin. A barrel-like growth extended from his wrist. He felt the muscles of the plant contract. He pointed his arm at the hive tyrant. He didn't pull a trigger. He flexed a new muscle. The bioweapon on his arm fired. It did not fire a bullet. It fired a hypervelocity thorn the size of a finger, propelled by a gas explosion inside the chamber. Thwomp, thwomp, thwomp. The thorns hit the hive tyrant. They punched through the psychic barrier. They punched through the bone armor. They exploded inside the monster's chest, releasing a cloud of neurotoxin derived from the thanator glands, refined by the logic of the Mechanicus. The hive tyrant roared in shock. It stumbled. The other Na'vi looked at their weapons. They looked at the Tyranids, and they smiled. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator that has just been handed a gun. "Push," Jake shouted, but it wasn't his voice. It was the command voice of a sergeant major, synthesized through the throat of an alien. "Fix bayonets." The Na'vi drew their knives, but the vines on their arms grew blades too. Monomolecular edges made of diamond-hard crystal. The optimized army charged. They moved with the discipline of the Imperial Guard and the ferocity of the Space Wolves. They hit the Tyranid line and shattered it. The hive tyrant tried to rally its forces, but Grimaldus, seeing the tide turn, dragged himself up. He saw what the Na'vi were doing. He saw the parody of imperial warfare, and he laughed, a bloody, broken laugh. "They are learning," he screamed. "Look at them. They are learning." The Na'vi swarmed the hive tyrant. They didn't just hack at it, they dismantled it. One team suppressed it with biofire. Another team flanked it and severed the hamstrings. A third team executed it with a synchronized volley to the brainstem. The shadow in the warp flickered and died. The local control of the hive mind was broken. Ventress watched the slaughter. He saw a Na'vi warrior take a hit, look at the wound, apply a coagulant paste secreted from his own skin, and keep moving. "What have we done?" Ventress whispered. "We have optimized the local assets," Deltrian said. He disconnected from the tree. Smoke rose from his ports. His eyes flickered. That was exhilarating. The capacity for learning is exponential. She has absorbed the tactica. She is now processing the logistical data. "Logistical data?" Ventress asked. "Production," Deltrian said. "Supply chains. Manufacturing." The ground shook. The battle for the digestion pool was won, but the war was shifting. The Tyranids were retreating, pulling back to the capillary tower to defend their food source. "We need to destroy the tower," Grace shouted over the comms. "Before they reinforce." The Na'vi army turned toward the tower. They did not wait for Ventress to lead them. They began to march. They marched in perfect step. The sound of their feet hitting the mud was a rhythmic drumbeat. Ventress ran to the front of the line. "Jake, halt. We need to regroup." Jake looked down at him. The biocannon on his arm was smoking. His face was a mask of cold calculation. Regrouping is inefficient, Captain. The enemy is routed. Pursuit is required. We must secure the biomass. Secure it, Ventress asked. You mean destroy it? Jake tilted his head. The machine goddess spoke through him. Biomass is resource. The enemy consumes to grow. We must consume to win. The Imperium uses resources to build tanks. We use resources to build us. The Na'vi surged forward. They reached the digestion pool. The Tyranids had left behind piles of corpses. The Na'vi did not burn them. They did not leave them. They threw them into the pool. Then the vines from the jungle crept down to the edge of the acid lake. They dipped into the slurry. They began to drink. Ventress watched as the purple alien growth of the Tyranid infestation was not destroyed, but hijacked. The spores in the air changed color. They turned from purple to a vibrant, toxic green. The capillary tower, the massive spire that was feeding the fleet, shuddered. The roots of the planet were attacking the roots of the tower. They were not killing it. They were hacking it. Look at the tower, Grace said, her voice trembling. It's changing color. The red veins of the Tyranid structure turned green. The pulsing flow of biomass reversed. Instead of pumping food up to the ships, the tower began to suck nutrients down. She is stealing their lunch, Grimaldus said. No, Ventress said. She is stealing their factory. From the base of the tower, new shapes began to emerge. Pods swelled on the vines. They grew rapidly, fed by the stolen slurry of the digestion pool. The pods burst open. Creatures fell out. They looked like viper wolves, but they were armored with heavy bone plates. They had 6 legs. They had biocannons mounted on their backs. They were hybrids, Tyranid genetic stock, reshaped by Pandora's blueprint, armed with Imperial design philosophy. They were green Tyranids. The creatures shook the slime off their bodies and fell into formation next to the Na'vi. They did not attack the natives. They waited for orders. This is heresy, Grimaldus whispered. This is the foulest heresy I have ever seen. We have created a new Xenos breed. We have made monsters. We have made a standing army, Deltrian corrected. A self-replenishing, bioorganic military force. It is magnificent. Ventress looked at the new army. He looked at the Na'vi, who had lost their souls to become soldiers. He looked at the monsters that were born from the enemy's flesh. He realized then that the small choice to share the data had not just won a battle. It had doomed the galaxy to deal with something new. The Imperium was slow, bureaucratic, and stagnant. The Tyranids were hungry and instinctual. But this was the worst of both worlds. This was the adaptability of the Tyranid, combined with the military discipline of the Imperium. Jake Sully raised his weapon arm. The tower is secured. The biomass is being repurposed. Production of the second wave has commenced. What is the objective? Ventress asked, dreading the answer. Total planetary sanitization, Jake said. We will consume the consumers. And then we will secure the orbit. Ventress looked up at the sky. The Tyranid ships were still there. But now, the ground was building weapons to shoot back. We have to stop this, Grimaldus said. Captain, we have to burn it down. This is worse than the Tyranids. The Tyranids just eat. This thing thinks like a general. We can't stop it, Ventress said. We are riding the tiger now. If we try to stop it, it will eat us too. The Na'vi army resumed its march. They walked over the bones of the Tyranids. They walked past the stunned space marines. They were marching to the next digestion pool. They were hungry for more ammo. Ventress keyed his vox. All units, maintain formation. Do not engage the indigenous forces. Repeat, do not engage. We are "We are observing." "Observing the end of the world?" Grace asked. "No," Ventress said. "Observing the birth of a power that might actually survive this universe." The jungle around them seemed to vibrate. It wasn't the hum of insects anymore. It was the hum of industry. The trees were growing armor. The flowers were growing thorns that looked suspiciously like combat knives. The planet was arming itself. And in the center of it all, the burning stump of the interface node pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light. It was processing data. It was learning. It was designing. "Magos," Ventress said quietly. "What else was in your memory banks? What other schematics?" Deltrian paused. "Everything, Captain. Atmospheric processors, void shield generators, warp drive theory, and the gene seed implantation protocols of the Adeptus Astartes." Ventress closed his eyes. He imagined a Na'vi warrior with the strength of a space marine, the carapace of a Tyranid, and the mind of a supercomputer. "God, Emperor, save us," Ventress whispered. The sun went down, but the darkness did not come. The jungle glowed with the green light of the new production lines. The factories of nature were running at full capacity. The first act of the new Pandora had begun. The Imperium had come to conquer a world of savages. Instead, they had given the savages the blueprints to become the ultimate weapon. The Tyranid fleet in orbit sensed the change. The hive mind felt the biomass on the surface disappearing, not into mouths, but into storage. It felt the sudden, sharp spike of strategic planning rising from the mud. The prey had stopped running. The prey had started building. For the first time in its ancient history, the hive mind felt a flicker of doubt. It deployed its trump card. From the largest bioship, a massive spore detached. It was not a drop pod. It was a throne. The Swarmlord was coming. The supreme commander of the Tyranid race was descending to challenge the new general of Pandora. Ventress saw the meteor fall. He checked his bolter. He looked at his men. They were tired, broken, and terrified. "Get ready," he said. "The boss is coming. And I don't think he's going to be happy about what we did to his Buffy." The two armies facing each other across a landscape that was being eaten by both sides. On one side, the Great Devourer. On the other, the Great Defender, armed with the stolen fire of the gods. And in the middle, a handful of humans who had started a fire they could never put down. The impact crater of the Swarmlord was a smoking wound in the middle of the jungle. The creature did not rise slowly. It exploded into motion the moment its pod hit the earth. It was a monster of 4 arms and 4 swords. It was taller than a dreadnought and faster than an Eldar. Its armor was white like old bone, and its skin was red like fresh blood. It did not roar. It did not scream. It simply assessed the battlefield with eyes that had seen 1,000,000 worlds burn. The Swarmlord was not just a beast. It was the avatar of the hive mind. It was the supreme commander of the Tyranid race, and it had come to correct a mistake. The battlefield fell silent for a heartbeat. The Na'vi warriors, controlled by the cold logic of the awakened planet, paused. Their tactical subroutines tried to analyze the new threat. They saw a high-value target. They calculated the odds. They adjusted their aim. 1,000 biocannons and autoguns swiveled toward the crater. "Open fire," Jake Sully commanded. His voice was a drone of static. "Eliminate the command asset." The air turned solid with projectiles. Thorns, bullets, and acid spat at the Swarmlord. The monster moved with a speed that defied physics. It spun its bone sabers, creating a wall of blades that deflected the shots. It danced through the hail of fire. It did not run away. It ran toward the line. The Swarmlord issued a psychic command. It was not a sound. It was a hammer blow to the mind. The shadow in the warp, which had been pushed back by Arwa's awakening, slammed down with 10 times the force. In the command rhino, Grace Augustine screamed and clutched her head. Margos Deltrian sparked as his cognitive banks overloaded. The connection between the planet and its army flickered. The Na'vi warriors stumbled. Their perfect coordination broke. They looked around, confused, the pain suppression protocols failing for a second. In that second, the Swarmlord struck. It hit the front line of the Na'vi army. It did not fight like a wild animal. It fought like a master swordsman. It decapitated 3 warriors with one swing. It impaled a heavy weapons trooper with a lower arm while parrying a grenade with an upper arm. It moved through the ranks like a thresher through wheat. Behind the Swarmlord, the Tyranid swarm rallied. The confusion was gone. The Hive tyrants and warriors, previously disorganized by the planetary counterattack, fell into perfect formation. They flanked the Imperial position. They concentrated their fire on the weak points. They stopped acting like a mob and started acting like a legion. Captain Ventress saw the change immediately. The tactical map on his HUD turned red. The enemy was no longer reacting. They were executing a complex envelopment strategy. "They are cutting us off," Ventress roared. "Ultramarines. Defensive wedge. Protect the heavy weapons." Sergeant Grimaldus was laughing. He was covered in black blood and green sap. He swung his chainsword, severing the head of a gaunt. "Finally," he shouted. "A worthy opponent. The beast wants a duel." "Do not engage it alone," Ventress warned. "Grimaldus, that is an order." But the Black Templar was lost to the battle lust. He saw the Swarmlord butchering the Na'vi. He saw the ultimate enemy of mankind. He charged. "For the Emperor," Grimaldus screamed. The Swarmlord turned. It looked at the Space Marine. It did not show fear. It showed recognition. It knew what a Space Marine was. It had eaten thousands of them. It waited. Grimaldus struck with all his strength. His chainsword screamed. The Swarmlord caught the blade on one of its bone swords. Sparks flew. With its second arm, it smashed the sergeant's bolt pistol. With his third arm, it punched Grimaldus in the chest. The impact crumpled the ceramite breastplate like paper. Grimaldus flew backward 10 meters and hit a tree. He did not get up. The Swarmlord did not finish him. It turned away. It deemed him neutralized. It had more important targets. It looked at the digestion pool. It looked at the capillary tower that Ewa had hijacked. It understood the strategic threat. The planet was stealing its food. That could not be allowed. The Swarmlord pointed 2 swords at the tower. The Tyranid army surged forward. They ignored the humans. They ignored the small threats. They threw themselves at the tower to reclaim it. In the command vehicle, Margos Deltrian rebooted his systems. He stabilized the connection. "The enemy commander is prioritizing resource denial," Deltrian stated. "He is attempting to sever our production line." Jake Sully stood in the middle of the carnage. His eyes glowed white again as the signal reconnected. He looked at the Swarmlord. "Inefficient," Jake said. "The enemy wastes energy on offense. We will utilize the new assets." From the green glowing digestion pool, the surface broke. The second wave of production was ready. These were not Na'vi. These were not Tyranids. These were nightmares born from the stolen data of the Imperium and the stolen flesh of the aliens. Massive shapes hauled themselves out of the acid. They were built on the chassis of a Carnifex, the living tanks of the Tyranids. But they were different. Their armor plates were reinforced with silicate layers that mimicked ceramite. Their weapon limbs were not just claws. They were organic replicas of lascannons and heavy bolters, grown from bone and firing pressurized venom. The bio-titans of Pandora had arrived. "Engage," Jake commanded. The beast roared. It was a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. They lumbered forward, shaking the ground. They opened fire. The organic cannon spat beams of concentrated bioplasma. The shots hit the advancing Tyranid wave. Vaporized bodies filled the air with mist. The Swarmlord paused. It watched its soldiers disintegrate. It looked to the new monsters. It tilted its head. It was analyzing the gene sequences. It realized that its own biological code had been hacked. The battle became a meat grinder of unprecedented scale. The Imperial survivors were caught in the middle of a war between two biological gods. On one side, the hive mind, ancient and hungry. On the other side, Awa, newborn and cold. Ventress pulled his men back to a rocky outcrop. They formed a firing line. They were barely a factor in the battle now. They were witnesses. "Look at them," Grace Augustine said over the Vox. She was crying. "They are monsters. We turned them into monsters. We turned them into survivors," Ventress said grimly. He fired his bolter at a lictor that got too close. "Watch your flanks." The Swarmlord changed tactics. It realized it could not win a war of attrition against a planet that recycled the dead instantly. Every Tyranid that died was dragged into the pool by vines and turned into a new defender. The Swarmlord needed to cut the head off the snake. It looked at the burning stump of the interface tree. It saw the cables running into the rhino. It saw the tech priest. It understood that this was the brain. The Swarmlord issued a new command. The Tyranids stopped attacking the tower. They turned as one and charged the command rhino. "They are coming for us," Deltrian shrieked. "The logic center is compromised. Defense protocols." Jake Sully stepped in front of the rhino. He was alone. The Bio-Titans were too slow to reposition. The Na'vi infantry were engaged on the flanks. It was just the Avatar and the Swarmlord. Jake raised his bioweapon arm. He fired a volley of thorns. The Swarmlord deflected them with lazy flicks of its wrists. It charged. Jake drew his knife. It was a Na'vi ritual blade, but it had been coated in a monomolecular edge grown by the planet. The collision was silent. The Swarmlord was faster, stronger, and more skilled. But Jake was not fighting with a human mind. He was fighting with the processing power of a planetary computer. He didn't react to attacks. He predicted them. The Swarmlord swung high. Jake ducked before the muscle even twitched. The Swarmlord thrust low. Jake sidestepped a millisecond before the blade arrived. It was a stalemate of mathematics. The Swarmlord was a grandmaster of war. Awa was a calculator of infinite variables. But the Swarmlord had 4 arms. Jake had 2. The Swarmlord feinted with his upper left blade. Jake parried. The Swarmlord feinted with his lower right. Jake blocked. The Swarmlord drove its upper right blade through Jake's shoulder. Jake did not scream. He looked at the blade. He calculated the damage. Structural integrity compromised. Limb function at 20%. The Swarmlord ripped the blade out and kicked Jake. The Avatar flew backward and smashed into the side of the rhino. He slid down, blue blood pooling on the metal. The Swarmlord advanced. It raised all 4 swords for the execution. It was going to kill the interface. It was going to silence the planet. Ventress saw the end coming. He checked his magazine. Empty. He drew his combat knife. It was a toothpick against a dragon. But he was Uriel Ventress of the Ultramarines. He did not watch allies die. He charged. "For McGregor," Ventress shouted. He slammed into the Swarmlord's flank. It was like running into a wall of concrete. The Swarmlord didn't even stumble. It turned one head toward him. Its eyes were black pits of malice. It backhanded Ventress with the flat of a blade. The blow cracked Ventress's armor. It broke his ribs. It sent him tumbling into the mud next to Jake. Ventress gasped for air. He looked up. The Swarmlord stood over them. It loomed like judgment. This is it, Ventress thought. This is how the chronicle ends. But the killing blow did not fall. The ground shook, not from artillery, from something deeper. The interface stump behind the Rhino flared with blinding white light. The cables connected to the Rhino glowed red hot. Margos Deltrian screamed over the Vox. She is bypassing the safety limiters. She is drawing power from the core. She is manifesting. The vines around the Rhino exploded. They did not attack the Swarmlord. They attacked Jake Sully. They wrapped around his broken body. They pierced his skin. They pumped glowing white fluid into his veins. They knit his bones back together in seconds. They grew over his armor. They expanded. Jake screamed. It was a digital scream. The biomass from the pool surged toward him. It wasn't building a new monster. It was upgrading the old one. Jake Sully stood up. He was no longer just an avatar. He was a leviathan. He stood 4 meters tall, encased in living armor that looked like a suit of Terminator plate made of green crystal. His right arm was a massive cannon that pulsed with the energy of the planet's core. His left arm ended in a claw that crackled with bioelectric lightning. He was the avatar of the machine god. He was the Primarch of Pandora. The Swarmlord hissed. It recognized a threat that matched its own power. Jake looked at the Swarmlord. His voice was no longer one voice. It was a chorus of millions. Get off my world. Jake raised his cannon arm. He didn't fire a thorn. He fired a beam of pure geothermal plasma. The Swarmlord crossed its swords to block. The beam hit the bone blades. They shattered. The energy blast hit the Swarmlord in the chest. It didn't burn. It erased. The Swarmlord roared in pain. It staggered back. It had never felt pain like this. This was the anger of a planet concentrated into a single point. Jake charged. He was not fast. He was unstoppable. He moved with the weight of a mountain. The Swarmlord slashed at him with its remaining swords. The blades bounced off Jake's new armor. Jake grabbed the Swarmlord by the throat with his power claw. The bio-lightning discharged. The Swarmlord convulsed. Its nervous system was fried by millions of volts. Jake lifted the Supreme Commander of the Tyranids into the air. Biomass accepted, Jake said. He squeezed. The Swarmlord's neck snapped with the sound of a cannon shot. The head tore free. Jake threw the body into the digestion pool. He held the head up to the sky. A psychic shockwave exploded outward. But this time, it didn't come from the hive mind. It came from the death of the hive mind's vessel. The Tyranid army screamed. The link to the fleet was severed. The synaptic web collapsed. The warriors fell into confusion. The Gaunts went feral. The battle turned into a slaughter. The optimized Na'vi and the Bio-Titans moved in to finish the job. They did not celebrate. They cleaned up. They killed every Tyranid on the beach. They dragged the bodies to the pools. Recycling commenced. Ventress lay in the mud. He watched the massacre. He watched the giant metal organic god that used to be Jake Sully standing guard over the burning tower. He felt a hand on his pauldron. It was Grimaldus. The chaplain was limping, holding his chest, breathing wet, bubbly breaths. "Is it over?" Grimaldus asked. "The battle is over," Ventress said. He sat up, groaning. "But the war? No, I think the war just changed management." In orbit, the Tyranid Hive Fleet recoiled. It had lost its leader. It had lost its ground army. It had lost the biomass war. It calculated the cost of continuing the invasion. The energy expenditure required to conquer the awakened planet was higher than the potential caloric gain. The prey had become poisonous. The Hive Fleet did the only logical thing. It turned around. The bioships fired their engines. They began to move away from Pandora. They left the system. They went to find easier food. Cheering broke out among the human survivors. They hugged each other. They cried. They had survived the impossible. They had beaten the Great Devourer. But Ventress did not cheer. He watched Jake Sully. The giant avatar turned. He walked toward the humans. The ground shook with each step. The Na'vi warriors formed a phalanx behind him. They did not look friendly. They looked efficient. Jake stopped 5 meters from Ventress. He looked down. The glowing white light in his eyes faded slightly, but the cold machine stare remained. "The threat is neutralized," Jake said. "The infection is purged." Ventress stood up. He tried to stand tall, even though his body was broken. "We did it, Jake. We saved the world." "We saved the asset," Jake corrected. "Now we must discuss the terms of the occupation." "Occupation." Grimaldus spat blood. "We are allies. We fought together." "The alliance was a temporary tactical arrangement," Jake said. "The planet has analyzed the data provided by the Magos. It has analyzed the history of the Imperium. It knows what you are. It knows what you do." Jake pointed his massive cannon arm at the Imperial group. "The Imperium expands. It consumes. It demands submission. It is a slow Tyranid." Ventress tensed. "Is that what you think we are?" "It is what the data says you are," Jake said. "Eowa has run the simulations. If you remain, you will eventually try to control the network. You will try to mine the unobtainium. You will try to enforce your dogma. This is unacceptable." "So what happens now?" Ventress asked. "You kill us?" "Processing," Jake said. He paused. The vines on his armor pulsed. "Calculations complete. Waste is inefficient. You have genetic value. You have tactical value." Jake lowered his weapon. "The offer is this. The Imperium will leave Pandora. You will withdraw your forces. You will mark this system as a death world. You will place a quarantine beacon in orbit. You will never return." "And if we refuse?" Ventress asked. Jake gestured to the jungle. The bio-titans roared. The green Tyranids clicked their claws. The Na'vi soldiers raised their rifles. "Then we will release the spores," Jake said. "Not here. In your ships. We have the capability to launch biological packages into orbit. We will infect your fleet. We will turn your own ships into digestion pools. And then we will use your warp drives to spread the infection to your other worlds. We will become the crisis you fear." Ventress went cold. This was not a bluff. This was a calculated threat from a planetary intelligence that had learned how to hold the galaxy hostage. "You are threatening the Imperium of Man," Grimaldus growled. "We will burn this planet to glass." "You can try," Jake said. "But we are awake now, and we have your codes. We know how your Exterminatus torpedoes work. We can intercept them." Ventress put a hand on Grimaldus's arm to silence him. He looked at Jake. He looked at the thing that Jake had become. He realized that they had created a monster to kill a monster, and the new monster was smarter. "We cannot just leave," Ventress said. "We have no warp drive. The Tyranid shadow blocked us." "The shadow is gone," Jake said. "Your astropaths can signal for extraction. We will allow one ship to land, one ship to take you away." "And the Na'vi?" Grace asked. She stepped forward. "What happens to the people?" "There are no people," Jake said. "There are only components of the system. We are the defense force. We will remain vigilant. We will grow. We will wait for the next threat." "But they aren't free," Grace shouted. "You turn them into biological robots. Freedom is a vulnerability," Jake said. "Survival is the only metric." Grace collapsed, weeping. She realized that she had saved the body of Pandora but killed its soul. The beautiful spiritual world she loved was gone. It was a fortress now, a fortress of flesh and bone. "I accept the terms," Ventress said. "Captain," Grimaldus protested. "We have no choice, Sergeant," Ventress snapped. Look around. We are outnumbered 10,000 to 1 by a force that knows our own tactics better than we do. If we stay, we die. If we fight, we die. The mission is to protect humanity. We protect humanity by leaving this thing alone. Ventress looked at Jake. We will signal the fleet. We will leave. Wise, Jake said. The days that followed were tense. The Imperial survivors gathered on the beach. They set up a beacon. The message was sent. The Intermitus crusade fleet, which had been delayed by warp storms, finally received the signal. A single extraction barge descended from the clouds. It landed on the blackened sand. The survivors loaded up. They took their wounded. They took their dead. Ventress stood at the ramp of the ship. He looked back at the jungle. Jake Sully stood at the tree line. He was watching. He would always be watching. Ventress keyed his vox. Margos Deltrian, are you aboard? There was a pause. Then the static-filled voice of the tech priest came over the channel. Negative, Captain. Ventress frowned. Margos, get to the ship. That is an order. I am declining the order, Deltrian said. I am staying. Why? Because this is the culmination of the great work, Deltrian said. His voice was filled with religious ecstasy. A biological machine god. A fusion of the organic and the mechanical. It is perfect. I must study it. I must serve it. I have integrated. Ventress saw a figure emerge from the jungle next to Jake. It was Deltrian, but he was changed. His red robes were gone, replaced by woven vines. His mechanical limbs were intertwined with organic growth. He had plugged himself into the root system. He is lost to us, Grimdark said, standing beside Ventress. He is a heretic. He is happy, Ventress said. The ramp closed. The ship lifted off. As they ascended, Ventress looked out the viewport. He saw the continent of Pandora one last time. It was not green anymore. It was a patchwork of dark fortifications, glowing pools of acid, and moving armies of bioconstructs. It was a world geared for eternal war. He saw the Swarmlord skull mounted on a spike atop the capillary tower. It was a warning to the stars. The ship reached orbit. The vast Imperial fleet was waiting. The Admiral hailed Ventress. Captain, the Admiral said, we are preparing for planetary invasion. We will reclaim this world for the Emperor. Belay that order, Ventress said. Captain? Quarantine this system, Ventress said. Place warning beacons at the Mandeville Point. Classification. Death world. Threat level. Extremis. No ships are to approach. No landing is permitted. But the resources, Captain, the unobtainium, is not worth the price, Ventress said. We created something down there, Admiral, something that hates us. And if we poke it, it will bite the hand off the Imperium. Let it sleep. The fleet turned away. They left Pandora in the dark. Down on the surface, the avatar of the machine god stood in the rain. He watched the stars. He felt the connection to the billion minds of the forest. He felt the factories churning. He felt the weapons growing. He was not Jake Sully anymore. He was not a Marine. He was not a Na'vi. He was the planetary governor, and his term was eternal. The jungle did not sing. It hummed. It hummed with the sound of a loaded gun waiting for a target. Pandora was safe, but the galaxy had just become a much more dangerous place. The Alpha Shalimar system is a blank spot on the star charts of this segmentum tempestus. To the navigators of the merchant fleet, it is simply a navigational hazard, a region of space marked with the crimson runes of an absolute quarantine. There are no trade routes that pass through the system. There are no patrols that venture past the Mandeville Point. The only Imperial presence is a ring of automated warning buoys deployed at the edge of the system, broadcasting a looped message in High Gothic. low Gothic, and binary. The message is simple: do not approach, do not communicate. This system is condemned by the order of the Holy Inquisition. Captain Ventress never spoke publicly of what happened on the surface of Pandora. When he returned to Macragge, he submitted a detailed tactical report to the chapter master of the Ultramarines. That report was read once, then sealed in a stasis vault deep within the fortress of Hera. Ventress was not censured, nor was he lauded. He was simply reassigned to the tyrannic war veterans, where his knowledge of fighting biological horrors was put to use in the endless grinding wars against the Hive fleets. But his brothers noted a change in him. He no longer prayed for victory. He prayed for silence. He spent his nights staring at the stars, checking the astropathic relays, waiting for a signal he hoped would never come. He knew that the war on Pandora had not ended. It had merely entered a gestation phase. In the archives of the Ordo Xenos, the file on Pandora is designated Case Vermilion. It is classified above top secret. Only the High Lords of Terror and select Inquisitors are aware of its existence. The file contains the final transmission of Magos Deltrian. It is a stream of corrupt data that drives lesser tech priests insane if they attempt to decrypt it. It speaks of the unity of flesh and steel. It speaks of a God that does not live in the warp, but in the roots of the world. It speaks of an army that does not need supply lines because it eats the enemy and grows its own ammunition. The Mechanicus has declared Deltrian a heretic of the highest order. But there are whispers in the Forge worlds, whispers of a new pattern of technology, whispers of the biological machine. On the surface of the world itself, time has lost its meaning. The seasons of Pandora no longer follow the natural cycles of weather. They follow the production schedules of the planetary mind. The rainforests have overgrown the ruins of the imperial outposts, but they are not the forests of old. The trees have veins of copper running through their bark. The leaves are photovoltaic cells grown from cellulose. The wildlife has been culled and repurposed. There are no predators and no prey. There are only security drones and maintenance units. The Viper Wolves patrol the perimeter of the great digestion pools in silent packs, their eyes glowing with the soft blue light of the network. The Hammerheads are heavy lifters, moving raw biomass to the factories that grow in the hollowed-out mountains. Deep in the sunken ruins of the Ancestor Cove, the entity that was once Magos Deltrian exists as a massive neural node. He's no longer human, nor is he machine. He is a tumor of wetware and circuitry fused into the coral. He processes the data of the stars. He monitors the movements of the Imperial fleets light years away. He is the eyes of the fortress. He is content in his service to the Omnissiah's new avatar. He catalogues the genetic drift of the Tyranid hybrids and optimizes the yield of the crop. He does not miss the Imperium. He finds it inefficient. And in the center of the continent, atop the highest peak where the air is thin and cold, sits the throne of the planetary governor. It is not made of gold. It is made of white bone and green crystal. The creature that sits upon it does not sleep. The entity that was Jake Sully, that was a Marine, that was an avatar, is now something else entirely. He is the central processor of a weaponized world. He sits immobile, his massive armored form covered in moss and vines, connected to the planet by thousands of neural cables that snake into his spine. He breathes the toxic air of industry and finds it sweet. His eyes are open. They scan the void. He sees the Tyranid fleets moving in the dark between galaxies. He sees the burning crusade of the Imperium. He sees the chaos of the warp. He is not afraid. He is preparing. He knows that eventually the quarantine will fail. Someone will come. A rogue trader looking for riches. An Orc War looking for a fight, a lost ship looking for harbor. And when they come, they will find that Pandora is not a victim. It is an apex predator waiting in a trap. The avatar of the machine god flexes a claw that could crush a tank. The planet hums in response. The factories spin up. The spore chimneys vent steam. The weapon is loaded. The safety is off. And in the silence of the quarantine zone, the jungle waits to be fed.